During my early days entering the coffee world, I always heard coffee enthusiasts saying that a grinder is the most important component of any espresso setup. This advice resonated with me the most. In fact, so much so that someone had a go at me passionately. Do not buy an electric grinder for espresso that costs less than 500 USD. That's dumb. Actually, more than one person said that to me. But now, I've kind of grown to become quote-unquote obsessive myself. So I always have this urge to say the same thing to aspiring newcomers. Until I realize how stupid that's going to be. It's the most effective way to get them hate us, as if we're not hated enough already. This is the best way to make them uninterested in continuing their journeys to join us to become coffee experts. I'm not a coffee expert, by the way, so make that them rather than us. It's not that the advice is wrong, but hearing something like that as someone starting out was very, very frustrating for me. I didn't have any idea what they were talking about, so I completely didn't get the negativity. But let me tell you that there is an element of reason in that advice. There is no way that a newbie understands any of these, so the advice is probably doing more harm than good. Our mission in this video is to find out why they are saying it in the first place. Yes, I am obsessive myself, so make them us instead of they this time. I get it. It's always tricky to have an answer without a better definition in the first place. It's going to be better if we can give a comprehensive explanation that explains the underlying knowledge behind this advice. In order to visualize the very reason, you need the real things. Real electric grinders, of course. So, I'm buying some ultra cheap sub $100 electric grinders, and I'll try to define what a grinder really means in an espresso setup. I'll try my best to do it from the standpoint of someone who is just starting out. I hope that by the end of this series, you can start to differentiate between an emotional advice and a rational advice. Ah, well, not like that. Maybe not. Okay, let me rephrase. I'll make you take a more informed decision on whether you should take these kind of advices seriously. No, not that either. That's terrible. Even worse than the last one. The dream of this video is that you should have a better idea of how you should be responding to such advice with a cooler head. This will at least get you closer to the truth. By being able to distinguish between a good and a bad grinder, you do not have to blindly buy an expensive grinder, because a self-proclaimed coffee expert said so. First, let's understand what the role of a grinder is in an espresso setup. I think the best way to explain this is by going through my regular espresso routine. It involves preparing the beans for grinding. Sometimes, I need to spray water to reduce static and clumping on the grounds. Static can also make the grounds and leftovers to stick to the walls of the grinder and everywhere else. You also need to weigh in the beans first. Some grinders have an automatic weighing function. When that's sorted out, move the grounds to the bean hopper and cover the beans to stop them from flying out. This is an unwanted effect called popcorning. Before we get the beans ground, we need to adjust the grinder according to the desired settings. An extra 100 micron gap on your burrs will give a massive change on your brews. Espresso is very, very finicky. You want your grinder to be as precise as possible. And obviously, the grinder itself has to work reliably. Reliability is also one of the #1 priorities. And you should also mind the noise of the grinder too. These things wake everyone up. Ideally, you also want an excellent distribution of grind size. Setting up a grinder that is not uniform will cause inconsistent espresso, which is a nightmare to set up. To reduce grounds that are stuck inside, you might also need to push the bellows. The retained grounds are often referred as grind retention. Then, spread the coffee with WD-T to break up the clumps. That was a long process, by the way. Better grinders are much more time efficient. Time is money for some. If you save 10 seconds every shot, and you make 100 shots a day, you save 83 hours a year. And don't forget to keep the grinders inside clean from time to time, so it lasts longer and doesn't accumulate rancid grounds. Let's try going through all that with our first victim here. This is the
Bell Life
electric conical burr coffee grinder, also sold on Amazon US as
Zulai.
Thanks AI text-to-speech. This is just a cheap $66 grinder from an unidentifiable Chinese OEM. Sound fishy, right? No. This is how everything works nowadays. Your iPhone could be made in the city of
Zhangzhou,
in the middle of China. It's globalization, everybody. And AI text-to-speech too. It redeemed itself. I know nothing about this grinder, except that it's relatively well reviewed on Amazon. I didn't bother finding out the specs when I bought it, so I'm expecting to get something terrible here. After examining it for a bit, it appears to be a simple conical burr grinder. A jack-of-all-trades grinder that reminds me of my old grinder, the cheap ZD10 from Wellhome. The size of this grinder is pretty compact, while on the other hand, the materials leave something to be desired. It feels a bit light and flimsy, but remember, it's just 66 USD after all. It's quite unjust to complain about build quality, but thankfully, I don't see any glaring flaws or defects. Since the point of this video is not about the grinder itself, I'm not going to go deep into the operational details. Instead, I'll rather talk you through how these kind of grinders would do in a realistic home espresso setup. The first thing that sticks out for me is this grind container. It's kind of unnecessary for home espresso. For other brew methods though, it's potentially very helpful. The grinder is divided into 50 clicks, from setting 1 to 51. There are labels indicating which one corresponds into the proper grind size, and it goes from espresso through French press. I don't really know how far does the burr move every click, but I'm guessing it moves quite far, judging by the amount of range the grinder has. These electronic buttons can let you set the time presets that you can change, but I'm using these lovely vials, which are much more accurate at dosing than any timers on the world. But if these vials are not your cup of tea, the timer might be very helpful. Oh, by the way, I'd go buy these vials if I want to have a much manageable espresso setup at home. It's very easy to fire up the grinder. You just press the electronic start and stop button. It's quite noisier than other grinders, which is expected considering how little heft there is in the whole construction. With single dosing, popcorning isn't much of an issue, which is surprisingly nice. This grinder has a 150 watt motor, which is good for home setups, but I advise you not to grind coffee for back-to-back espresso brewing. To visualize how fast does the grinder grinds coffee, let's see how much time it takes to grind 17 grams of medium roasted coffee. It does it in about 11 seconds, which is fairly quick, but still, you don't want to overuse it. Use it sparingly to protect the metal cutters, or often referred as burrs, from overheating. Clumping and static is reasonable, nothing to write home about, but not the worst one I've ever seen. We can see a buildup of residue, but this might be because it's quite dry today. When testing the grinder for my Flare espresso maker, I found that the grinder retains more than 2.5 grams of coffee at the number 5 setting. It's quite a lot actually. Oh yes, I forgot to mention that you get free bellows that's supposed to reduce retention. This is the kindest move I've ever seen from a home appliance product. Like literally. I'm serious. My Eureka doesn't even come with one. Plus, you can tap the sides of the grinder so the grounds fall from the chute. You can also tap the start and stop button multiple times to create extra vibration. When you do all of that, you can reduce the retention to about 0.5 gram, which is not far off from my Eureka grinder with bellows. I am not able to exactly quantify the uniformity of the grounds. I can tell from an unscientific visual and taste inspection that this is a grinder that is more than good enough. I did around 10 espressos with this grinder, and the results were quite consistent. I kept the grind setting to be 5 at all times. My concern is with quote-unquote real espresso setups though, like my more finicky Flare 58 for instance. The grinder might just not grind fine enough, or that the grind steps are too imprecise. On the other hand, for the Flare signature, a much more forgiving espresso maker, it is perfectly fine. So that sounds like the probable foundation of that stupidly absurd advice that we talked in the beginning. Anyway, it's also pretty easy to clean. You have a toolless mechanism that is way simpler than my Eureka grinder. This is undoubtedly very nice for people who are just starting out. I get that the maker wants to make everyone happy with these timers and electronic buttons, but I think they should have set up a manual switch somewhere. Durability and reliability on electronic parts like these are always a concern. Regardless though, I'm still pretty sure that if you're using the grinder as it should be, by treating it as a home appliance, this thing should stay around for a while. I'm not sure about that, but okay. Second, I don't know why the ground container can't be placed securely on its place. They certainly can make something that feels robust. I mean, just look at the hopper or size adjustment mechanism. And yeah, that computer rendered image in Amazon is horrible, not gonna lie. With that said, I hope you know where we are heading with this series. I'll continue this research by looking at other similar grinders, lest I give a half-baked conclusion that doesn't come from a wide range of cases. I hope you can stay tuned for the next parts.